Welcome back. It's so good to have you here with us. I am with Natalie Shea today, who is a registered psychotherapist who has been trained in somatic work, mindfulness, and life coaching. She has specialized in working with binge and emotional eaters for over 15 years. And Natalie was obsessed with food and fixing her body since the age of 6. She felt there was no other way out other than diets. And so her life revolved around dealing with dieting and binge eating, cycling through all of that until she learned what food was really about. She has supported thousands of others to heal their relationship with food and their bodies. And I'm so excited to have her here today to speak to us about her journey and her best advice as a result of that long, long journey. So, Natalie, welcome. I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what your journey was. So I know that started at the age of 6, and now here you are doing this really powerful work. And I think it's really interesting to hear it from yourself and just like some of your biggest markers in that journey that might be really valuable for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this. And I really feel honored and touched when I get to share my story and hopeful that it will benefit others. Yeah, it started before actually the age of 6. I remember 6 was one of the first memories I had around my relationship with food and hiding food. Actually, I found a picture of myself that I remember so clearly. Of I was eating a bagel, and I like hid the bagel when my parents had the camera because I had so much shame that I was eating. And I look back at that and kind of is quite a support to see that now and that inner child, which I'll get to in a little bit. So the dieting and goals to lose weight started very young, as I said, and continued on. And I went to see over 15 to 20 dietitians, nutritionists at the age of 7 and 8. Saw personal trainers at that age too. Was put on a treadmill from the age of 9, and it kept going to more diets. Eventually, Weight Watchers, Slim Fast, Jenny Craig, cabbage soup diet. The list goes on and on. And eventually got to the point where when I turned 17, my parents said, you know what, we found a new way for you to get this weight off. And I was like, okay, what is it? And then they said, you're going in for a procedure. And what ended up happening was it was a new procedure that just came out, it's liposuction.
Mm.
And I remember going to the doctor and they were drawing on me and saying, we've got to get rid of this and this. And then I went through with the liposuction um, at the age of 17. And I really didn't know what it was or what I was getting into. And I had a lot of shame after it because I was black and blue, like my body, and wearing band aids for months.
Wow.
And after 6 months, I gained weight back. And so there was a lot of shame about that. So that led me to diet pills. And eventually, by the time I turned 19, I was very depressed, like severely depressed. And I couldn't figure it out. If I wanted something so badly, like why was it so hard? If my life revolved around this one goal, which was so pertinent in my life, the people around me, why couldn't I do it? So I eventually stayed in bed for quite a few months, extremely depressed. And then I said, there's got to be something else. So I started doing research and not as mainstream. And I started looking at how most of them fail, how 98% of people gain weight back. And then I started doing my healing journey. And I realized that it really wasn't about the food and it wasn't about um, anything more than what was deeper down, which was my feelings and emotions and trying to cope and manage with food in order to get by. And so I decided during my healing journey that I wanted to help others. So I went to school to become a registered psychotherapist, and I still study to do different types of modalities. I'm very big into, as you mentioned, somatic work. And now I help people. And so it's why I became a psychotherapist. So now I do this, and I'm so honored to get to hear other people's stories and help them on their journey to heal.
Mm. Wow, that's really quite a journey, and like you said, a lot of shame built in throughout that, and I think that's such a big thing that that comes up in this relationship with food because it can be so private, and generally like things like binge eating or like food restriction or any of those things are really done in like the silent space. So I'm wondering, for you, did you did you find these different outlets and different research and then start to find that sense of like freedom and forgiveness pretty instantly, or was it through this psychosomatic work and maybe even some of the somatic work? I don't know if you can speak to that around how that evolved for you.
Yeah, so it started first by me learning to start trusting myself. And I did quite a bit of talk therapy at the beginning. And what I recognized is my story just became a story, and I wasn't connecting to my body. And emotional eaters tend to live from the head up. They don't connect to their body. So we're taught at a young age. We're taught when we're born, we connect to our bodies. And then we lose that trust, not just physical body, but with food as well. We start losing trust as people around us tell us that we're not good enough or our bodies aren't good enough. So it's one thing to think it up here, but what we really need to do and what I help people focus on is connecting to their physical body so they can start recognizing that they're not just a head, and their bodies have such wisdom and give us so much information. When we go into dieting, we actually shut down our bodies and follow someone else's guidance. So we lose the trust within ourselves. Um, the other part that I think is extremely important is that we focus so much on the food. And so like that's up here, and everything under here is what's really going on. And then it's like walking on a tightrope. So you're so hyper focused on something, and then you feel like a failure when you give up. What's really happening is our bodies are screaming at us saying, I want you to pay attention to me. I want you to love me. I want you to respect me and help support me because I'm in pain or I'm struggling with something. So as I say that, what I help people do and what I learned through my own journey is to learn what the emotion is. So instead of numbing it with food, start understanding it and respecting the body and the feeling. Oftentimes I hear people say that they're told they're too sensitive, but really they're having a feeling. And when we can start managing and learning how to sit with that feeling instead of numbing it down, we can start recognizing the difference between hunger signals and emotional signals.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that for myself and my journey as you share about that. And so I'm thinking about, when I was really in like a state where I was just so ridden by like, yeah, the impulse to just be constantly thinking about food or binge eating or food restricting, like it was between those things. And I definitely was like not in my body, even though I was like dancing at the time, but like there was so much fear and anxiety in my system that I really was just like not tapping into. So I'm thinking about remembering how uncomfortable it was for me then, or how much, not even uncomfortable, just how much resistance there was to actually feeling what I was feeling. Um, and I imagine that you've been there before. So I'm wondering, when you work with clients, what is kind of your first um, suggestion or advice for them? Because it can be a lot for someone to go from like, I'm completely disassociating and disembodying to like, let me be with my feelings. And I think that a lot of the time, because it's like the anticipation of like everything that's going to come through, like it's like we have an awareness of it, can be so daunting. Um, that might cause us to not go there. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you recommend or some of the things that you've done that have been this like easing into that space of reconnecting?
Okay, great question. So the first thing is that I want to talk a little bit about the nervous system, if that's all right, and how the nervous
Yeah.
system, our bodies respond to things. So we can go into a state of hyperarousal, which is we feel a lot. We might have anxiety, we might feel on, and that's a way of leaving the body. We can go into the opposite of that, which is hypoarousal, where we feel lethargic, really down, kind of robotic. And that's another way of leaving the body. This middle zone, which is called the window of tolerance, there's a lot of work about the window of tolerance by Daniel Siegel. And what he talks about is when we sit in this window, we're able to connect to our bodies. So when people turn to food, they tend to go above that window of tolerance or below. If I were to sit down with you and say, let's just feel your feelings, because it's so uncomfortable and unknown for someone who hasn't been sitting with it, then that's where people get triggered into hyperarousal, which is above that window of tolerance, or below the window of tolerance, and hypoarousal. So I see a lot of people trying to start feeling their feelings and shutting down because it is too overwhelming. Our goal is to build that window of tolerance so you can be resilient to feeling more. So your question was, how do we get people to start, or how would I recommend starting this? I want to separate the question and say, one is to start when they're feeling in that window of tolerance. So when they're feeling grounded, calm, connected to themselves, that's when we really want to start just noticing our body. So even take a look at your body now. And, if I look at my body, I'm in a grounded space. I can feel some discomfort at my shoulders. I could feel my left ankle aching. And it's a way to start connecting slowly to your body. The other thing I wanted to mention was that when we are going for the binge, or we want to emotionally eat, we are in that state of hyper or hypoarousal, which means our bodies, our nervous system is completely thrown off and we're in fight or flight. So we're not actually going to be able to stop that. It's a body instinct. That's not the time to focus on the healing. That's a time to focus on getting back into your nervous system, okay, in that window of tolerance. There are some practical tools, which I'm going to give today, which can help that. I'm sure many people here have heard of taking like a hot bath, and you think, yeah, it's relaxing. But what it's actually doing is it's one tool to get you back in your window of tolerance so you can start physically feeling your body. Yeah, there are many other ways. Take a lotion and put it, like a lavender scent lotion. If you put it on your hands or your body and smell it, using your senses is such a powerful tool to reconnect to the body. A weighted blanket is another great tool. Even jumping up and down or dancing around. And I know for myself, I go into hypoarousal a lot. And so I know how hard it is at that time to try and transition into that window of tolerance. That's why I suggest doing it slowly. So get up and maybe just moving around, or go for a little bit of a walk, not to snap out of it, but to get yourself into that window of tolerance. When we're ready for a bit. So that's kind of when we're kind of in that fight or flight, or we're going for food. So I often recommend the first thing to do is to try one of those. Do not take away the food, because then you're punishing yourself, right? Like if food is, imagine this, if you have a toolbox, okay, many people have different tools. For emotional eaters and binge eaters, their toolbox might be 90% food. So it's actually a support. If you take that away, oftentimes you could feel desperate or not knowing what to do. Like it's like a dependency at that point on the food. When we start learning new tools to manage ourselves, we can lower that to even like 20 or 30% of the time, and use food for enjoyment, but not hurting or harming yourself with it. So it's a really big difference.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think about too, if someone's main tool into soothing or self-comfort has been food, right? Which understandably so is that way, because we grow up with like such a close relationship to food, and like, we cry for food, and then some parents parent by like giving food to like, you know, please them or to distract them, or there's a lot of different ways, and then food is the closest relationship. So I think that too, when we are really seeking connection, that can be a place that we go to. So I love what you're saying about being really mindful of like not taking that away. And what I'm also hearing is taking time outside of those triggered moments to practice what it's like to feel the body, feel the hands, and maybe connect to the breath or smell the lavender, so that when that impulse or the compulsion does come, there's a little bit more access to something else. Maybe the brain goes, oh, maybe I could just like breathe, or eventually the question becomes, what's actually going on, over a trajectory of small moments like that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and it's really so I really, as you said, separate them, because when we're going for the food, that's not the time. That's the time to use some of our tools to try to ground us, but that's not the time to start connecting to the body, because it could be very overwhelming, like the emotions in the body. What's really helpful is if you can imagine when you're at a maybe a 4 out of 10, 3, 4, 5 even out of 10, that's when you start noticing the body. It's like riding a bike. It's going to take practice. And because we've been so disconnected for a long period of time, it's going to take a little bit of practice to get back into it. And when we do that, and there's different ways to do that, a great way is like a body scan. So
Mm.
kind of focusing on different parts of your body, like if you're familiar with body scans, it's
Mhm.
like making a fist and releasing it, making a fist and releasing it, and start physically feeling your body. There were parts of my body I didn't feel for till I was in my 20s. And I didn't even know I didn't feel it. But I've gone through a lot of trauma in my childhood, and your perception is your reality. And when I started recognizing, oh my goodness, like I'm feeling things in my body that's always been there and I've shut it down. And it's reconnecting and relearning to sit in your body without numbing it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'd love to give just a couple more tools because I think
I
it
would
might be.
love that. I'm really enjoying them. They're so tangible too, which is something I'm really grateful for that you're bringing to this, because I know for myself, like, back when I was in my phase of really, yeah, feeling very challenged by this stuff, it was like it seemed so far out to have that freedom. So to have really actionable, tangible tools, I think is so beneficial and so powerful. So yes, please.
Okay, great. So the first thing I really want to reiterate is not taking away the food, because the food has actually been a tool to help and support us. And I know that seems really strange when we look at food and we've had a toxic relationship with it, but if we can look at actually how it supported us, I think it's so important not to take it away. Let's see if we can add in a tool in between or even after or before to start supporting us to get back into our window of tolerance. So if you're in hyperarousal, and that's when you're anxious, you feel your heart's racing, you feel panicky, your mind's racing, we want to bring that back down into that window of tolerance. And some really tangible tools is are to as I mentioned, I carry like lavender essential oils or lavender lotion in my purse pre-COVID, and I like put them on and really connecting to that smell and really connecting to any senses. There's one example which is super easy, and when I was in school learning about it, I was like, I'll never use that, and that's sight, right? So touch, taste, smell, sight, sound. And I remember a few years ago, my mom passed away and I went to the cemetery and it was closed because there was a huge storm. And I sat in the car and I just stared and I felt completely numb. And I don't know how long passed. And I finally called a friend who's familiar with this work. And she's like, Natalie, look around. What do you see around you? And I kind of rolled my eyes because if this isn't going to work. And then I looked around and I see trees. And she's like, well, what else do you see? And the more I recognized like 5 things that were green and noises around me, I got back into my body. So I'd say, although it sounds super simple, try to find 5 things that are blue in your room. Notice where you got them. Remember how you felt when you got them and just connect that way. Another great way is super easy is going for a walk. And that works well on hyper or hypoarousal. If you have kids and you can't leave, I have 2 kids, so I put on a song and I will dance around the kitchen to try to get back into my body and do it that way. So you don't need to leave the house. Some other ways is if you have a yoga ball, just hitting it against the wall and grabbing it. So you're using your body connection to feel it and grab it and grasp it. Peter Levine, who's very big in this field of somatic work, he often talks about a trampoline. So I actually bought a mini trampoline, and I use that. I use it for my son, for my daughter, for myself, and that works really well in hyper or hypoarousal to reconnect again to your window of tolerance to get into the body. And it's actually a really powerful tool. Some other things, if you wanted to get some things that aren't too expensive, are things like this pillow And it looks, actually, it's my daughter,
So cute.
really putting it against your chest and
Mm,
holding it there because it really helps you connect to your body. There's also weighted blankets, which are very trendy and popular right now. Those work really well as well. To again, it's like weight on your body, so it helps you reconnect to your body. Um, that you can jump on a not jump. You can sit on a yoga ball, one of those big balls, and kind of rock.
mhm.
Anything in the rocking motion can be very soothing and connect to the body, as well as a pulsating shower. So because the head pulsates, and you can connect your body that way. I'm also going to say when you're not feeling hyper or hypo aroused and you're in that window of tolerance, it's a great way to practice. I think they're like $12 on Amazon. You can use it, the pulsating, to connect to different parts of your body.
Mm.
I hope that was helpful.
That's so helpful. It's really, really helpful. And what it's making me think about too is just like just the availability to that window of tolerance that really comes through being connected to the body. And from like what I've understood over the years is, we leave our body because at one point it didn't feel safe to be in them, and we didn't have um the tolerance, like the understanding or the intelligence, emotional intelligence, to deal with the situation that felt bigger than us. And that can happen a lot. Like you've mentioned, it started for you probably younger than 6, but in childhood, when we are so connected to our body, but maybe we don't have that access to understanding and emotional intelligence and other things. And so when something traumatic happens, we start to learn to leave the body. So I'm just like really aware of that as I've like gone through my own journey and as I work with clients and think about what it means to be embodied. And on the other side of that, like just thinking about there is so much tolerance when we are in the body, actually. I've at least found for myself, like those moments that I thought were going to be so overwhelming and like I wouldn't be able to control. Um, my mind feels that way for sure. But once I had built up the tolerance and gotten back into my body, I find pretty amazing how much we actually can sit with when we build towards that tolerance.
Yeah, it is. It is really powerful. And you asked me earlier about the healing portion of it, and what you talked about, the child and the inner child that we all have inside of us who had to leave our body for whatever the reason is. Trauma is such a big word, but it could be someone's tone of voice that affected us negatively, or we just didn't emotionally feel safe, like we could speak to someone. And when we disconnect from our body, we want to repair that by reconnecting to that little child that's inside all of us and really support her to feel safe. So just to kind of reiterate, you have tools for when you feel like going for a binge or emotional eating, and those are the practical tools I talked about, using your senses. Then you have the tools of learning to sit with your body that are long-term healing. That's like where we build that resiliency long-term, and that work to allow that younger part of us to feel safe and connected and give her or him the needs that they didn't get met when they were young. And that's kind of what I'm hearing you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Um, I think too that, some people approach it from going at it, doing inner child work, and that's one portal which I know is powerful too for many. And then it's also um beautiful to just hear that like every path leads to a place, right, of that inner healing. And so to just even become aware of the body and start to make a little bit more space for feelings to come up, um, could be that space where that inner child starts to speak up of like, oh, I'm just actually feeling like it was, I just wanted to be heard or to be held, and I just want to be held. And that can be the thing that comes up and starts to give us awareness around like what that seed has been that we haven't been looking at for some time.
Yeah, for me, that's exactly similar to what happened. And I always heard about inner child. And it was when I started connecting to my body that I could access it in a really quick tool, which helps somatically. It's like if we're trying to connect the body, is even just our hand gently pressed on
Mm,
the chest and breathing. and allowing ourselves to be held by ourselves, which nobody can take away. And I just love that. These tools, they sound really simplistic, but in the moment, they are so powerful to reconnect us to our physical body. And that's what we need. Because again, we leave our bodies, as you mentioned, we
Mm.
disassociate, we live from the head up because that's our safe place. And we want to make our bodies safe again.
Yeah. And the season that we're in too right now, I've been thinking a lot about this, which is a big part of, the inspiration for this series was I was noticing tendencies in myself come up around obsessing around my body image or like body dysmorphia or just like fixation on food or fear of food again. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. And of course, I was able to like step back and sit and be like, okay, there's a lot going on in the world. Like, I'm very isolated. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot that's happening. So, even if someone isn't necessarily um, working through their relationship with food right now and doesn't have any challenges around it, there's like so many tools that you're offering that I know can benefit us all because in one way or another, like we're probably disassociating because we have so much access to distraction now. Like I think about, you can be on your phone and can be completely occupied for hours and not even know what has gone on and barely be in your head. Like it's kind of crazy when I like look back at that, right? So a lot of disassociation going on and then in this season of so much uncertainty and so much that is just changing constantly and challenging emotions that come up around that. I just imagine that that's so exasperated in many people. And so, even if it's not food, maybe it's something else that we're looking to come back to our body or to like feel some sort of connection. So I think that all of these tools that you're suggesting are just like really, like you said, they're simple, but they're magnificent gifts that we can all take with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, I hear what you're saying. I think through this time, I've gotten so many messages and emails about people reverting back to old patterns, which makes so much sense because of the amount of stress and overwhelm feeling that we have. And there's this idea, which is so important, it's self compassion. And if you've ever read Kristen Neff's work, she talks a lot about self compassion. And we are so compassionate towards other people and we give to other people, but we miss the most important person to give to, which is not selfish, it's actually self care. And when we can have some gentleness and love towards ourselves, we're then able to naturally and easily give it out to others. But we need to fill our gas tank before we fill others. So that idea of, yeah, you know what, it's a really hard time. And my toolbox is not as full as it was because I can't do everything I used to do. So let's reflect back and let's honor that I may be craving food more or whatever the tool is that's not working for me as well as I want it to, and see if I can be gentle on this is a really hard time. Let me see if I can get some support through books or through groups or meetups or whatever it is to support me with what's going on and how hard this time is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. It makes me think about too at one point in my journey that that window of tolerance that you're talking about that like you don't want to stop the binge like as it's happening, but like if you can bring awareness to like, oh, it's about to happen or like after it's happened. There were times where I remember being on the front end of it where I was like, okay, I know I'm going for food right now because I'm feeling like really lonely and just like stressed and so I'm going to do this. Like it was but it started to become just more a little more conscious, which I think was integral to like getting me to the other side of it versus like I'm binging or like I'm not and then there's just a bunch of shame after. It was more like okay, there's an awareness. And then what started to happen was over time I was like on the other side of it, I was like, well, I don't feel good right now. So then it was like, how did that make me feel? And I think that that's what you're talking about, right? The window opened and then I could stay with it after and be like, wow, that actually doesn't feel very good in my body, or I don't feel any different. Or, and then eventually it became like, okay, so what's in here? So just kind of saying, even, I guess what I'm saying is, even if someone is having that experience of like, I'm reaching for food a little bit more. What I think we can tend to do is like add on a bunch of shame right away. Like, oh, I should be over this by now. Or like, I can't believe I'm doing that again. Or I can't believe I'm obsessing about food. And instead being that compassionate friend or, partner to ourselves to say like, I totally get why you're reaching for food, and see if you can sit and breathe, and if you can't, then go for the thing. Like if we could have that dialogue with ourselves, and then check in.
Yeah, so you asked, that's actually the first thing I try and teach people is that we have the complex issue of the emotions. And then the next layer of it is the food. And this is actually a way that we're trying to support ourselves. But when you beat yourself up for it, you then develop a third layer of the shame and the guilt, which actually allows you to only focus on these two levels and you completely miss what's underneath. If you
Mm.
notice you're binging or emotional eating, what we can do is we can then recognize, okay, I did this. I tried to do this to support myself. What's really going on is under here. So I'm going to recognize that this was just a tool I tried to use to support myself. It wasn't ideal because it doesn't feel good in my body, but that's okay because I'm learning. And I actually don't believe in mistakes. I believe everything's a learning opportunity. And when we look at it with that lens, it actually allows us to be compassionate and gentle on ourselves.
I have chills. That was such a perfect, like, I've actually never seen someone break it down that way. And even for me, as such a visual person, that really, really helps. Just like understanding, okay, here's the feeling, here's the food, here's the shame and everything else. And then we can get so caught up here for, years or whatever it is, until we finally come into that space where we then come back to what it was all along. Um, so that visual is really helpful and really beautiful. Thank you for that.
Oh, sure. I know it
This
for
has been so nourishing. I'd love to hear. I know that you have a gift for the audience, and I'm really excited for them to get a little bit more of your work and your wisdom through it. So I'd love for you to share with those who are watching what that gift is.
Yeah, so I developed a free emotional eating toolkit to help you with some of these tools and to get you started on your journey of healing. So there's different visualizations, meditations, mindfulness exercises, and some tangible takeaways as well. So I want to offer it to everyone because the goal is that we all heal and we all heal together. And if you have any questions, of course, I'm always happy to answer and to try and support in any way I can. So that's what I want to offer your audience.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm going to include that link for that free gift in this email associated with this interview so that you have access to it, and you have access to Natalie Shea and her work. Natalie, thank you so much. There was so many incredible pieces of advice, tips, and just a lot of wisdom from your own journey that I know will go a really long way for those tuning in. So I'm really grateful that we could connect and that you were willing to share with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really an honor and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you. See you next time, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in.